Hello everyone, welcome to the video on how to get and give feedback. So what I'm going to talk about is firstly the purpose of feedback, because the moment we explain what the purpose is of feedback, then you're better able to actually, ask the right questions during time that you have to get and give feedback. Then I'm basically going to talk about how you can get good feedback as a speaker, and then how you're going to get good feedback as a judge. And this is not just about trainees or just analysts, but this is also about chairs and how you can improve as a chair. And then also this is going to be about how you can give feedback, both as a chair, but also as a panelist. So what is the purpose of feedback? So let's just start that you are a speaker, that during the tournament, you can basically ask, what is it that I should definitely continue? What are my strengths? What am I doing well? You can also then ask, what can you personally change in your speech? What should you spend more time on? And the important thing, sometimes people forget, is not just about how you improve as an individual, but also how you can improve as a team. Maybe you need to do prep time differently. Maybe you need to think differently about, should the person do more or less impacting? And should you then do, for example, more placing in the debate? How are you going to distribute that time? And this is going to be also something that might improve your speeches already during the tournament. But also, it can be useful to use this feedback for after the tournament. So this can be, getting resources or sources in general. So let's say you have a lot of trouble with making arguments about the economy or about international relations. Then at that point, it might be useful during, feedback to also ask, where can I learn more about this? What do you think are good sources? Or what do you think is important to focus on in the first place? Again, economy is a very broad concept, but maybe it just feels like it's most important to first consider how banks work and then trade, for example, so that you can better understand where you need to start in the first place. So it's not as overwhelming when you're going to try to case file, whatever. It also might just be that they have nice sources that you just haven't heard of, and just takes you less time to look it up yourself. It can also be useful to consider what exercises you can do. So it's not just about, oh, you need to be better at impacting, but what are maybe some, exercise that I can do to improve my impacting? Um, and also maybe they are, able to give you sources that aren't just about information, but either a workshop or debates that have been about a similar thing. So maybe there's been a motion about, I don't know, uh, cartels and whether you should classify them as terrorist organizations, which was a motion for Korea WDC. If you don't know that, that might be useful during feedback to kind of like, ask about, hey, are there similar debates I can maybe watch back which have high quality? And then the person might point you to these debates. So I think that's also important. And I think this goes somewhat similar for judges, right? So during the tournament, you can improve your deliberation. So what are my contributions? How are my reactions? But also how can I maybe improve my OA? And after the tournament, you can maybe reflect on how you did, which you can improve on. Exercise might be a bit harder, but they might be able to point you in, similar directions, which like, oh, watch this debate and then maybe come up with an OA. And here's also an OA which kind of like explains how these clashes work. Or maybe here's a workshop on how you can improve your deliberation or time management. And those ways can also improve you as a judge. So how can you then get good feedback as a speaker? So I think this process already starts before the tournament. So it is nice in general to already have an idea what you want to improve. So you can also look back at, for example, spars you did or other tournaments, and then you be like, what goes poorly? What oftentimes do you lose on? So, for example, lately I've been losing debates on because of clarity, and it's not that easy to follow me, which means that in the next tournament that I'm going to do, which is going to be Sophia Open Online, I'm going to just focus a lot on clarity and creating a good structure and trying to improve in that way. And I think it's important to focus on one thing, because if you're going to try to focus on five things, you can't really focus on five things. Just focus on one thing and then hone that in. Also, it might be nice to not just think about, okay, I need to improve this. You can also say like, I'm going to try to do something new. So for example, if I have problem with structuring, I might be like, okay, the way I'm going to write my notes, that's what I'm going to change to create that structure. And that's what I'm going to try to do. And you can also force yourself to then use this for at least three debates. You can also, of course, do weighing metrics as it states here on the slide. But that might be an easy way to just get yourself out of the comfort zone and try new stuff. So this is still kind of like abstract. So I also have more specific things that you can focus on during a tournament. So of course, when it is just proving better, proving things better. So proving better why something is true or proving why something is important, which can, be the building blocks of your argument. But it can also be, of course, framing. How do you prove your framing better? Another thing, which is a bit more meta, is time management. So do I do too much rebuttal and too little rebuilding of the case? Do I not spend enough time on impacting, and am I too much time spending explaining why something is true? Then, of course, something similar is placing in the debate. So again, you might, for example, lose debates not because your case isn't proven, but because you're not reacting enough to cases, or it's not clear how your argument works out with framing that's been given in the debate. So placing in debate can also be important, and also, of course, the strategy of the case. Are you, too derivative? Are you bringing two wild cases to be able to win in the first place? And I think that this broadly covers things that you can improve on, and just pick one of these things and then go to the debate and try to improve. So you also want to discuss with your speaking partner how you can improve. So for example, your speaking partner during prep time knows what you're trying to say. It feels like you have a lot of good ideas and maybe even good analysis, but maybe you don't bring that analysis to the debate, or they feel like the case is good, but they feel like there were maybe other strategic things that you could do. Maybe also time management. Maybe you should spend your time differently. So you can also discuss before the tournament and also maybe during the tournament. Do you just want to, reflect a bit on the debate? So you can do this either after the debate or after the OA, after the feedback. Like, what can we do better? It's also, of course, nice to have discussed this with your team partner, because some team partners might be, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to do feedback. I think that's enough. If I reflect too much, it's just going to be too nitpicky, or I don't know, I just don't have the mental energy to do that for 4 rounds in a day, which is completely fair, completely fine. What's important is also to reflect specifically on prep time with your team partner, because it's important to think of a case not only well during prep time, but also to communicate it well to your partner. So maybe you don't communicate exactly what you're going to bring, but maybe you need to be more effective on explaining what your path to victory is, for example. Or, did you even give the other person enough time to think or enough time to really, speak their minds on cases? And I think that that's also going to be good for teamwork, because at the moment you have a good prep time, you're also going to have more fun during the debate because you feel like you can trust each other. That's why I specifically put this on site. It's really important to have that nice prep time and feel like you're listened to and have like, just a good time during the prep time. And also this is important just during the OA when it is given. Write down why you won or lost a specific clash. Keep that with you so you can reflect, right? So the next time you're going to do another comp, you can look back at your notes and be like, oh, I've lost 3 out of 5 debates, or like, those clashes on lack of framing or lack of placing in a debate. And it makes it easier for yourself to, find what you need to improve on. Now, of course, this is before the tournament or even before you get feedback, but there are also specific questions that you can ask to already improve. And you have like simple and quick questions that you can do when, for example, you don't have that much time, deliberation or the OA took longer, and now the next debate is going to start. And these are just like the main points you want to hammer on to ask for feedback. So the first thing is always ask what you should continue doing, and then also ask what you should change, because sometimes they're going to be like, okay, you need to do more impacting. But the thing that they found really strong was rebuttal. But when you then spend more time on impacting and you take away rebuttal, which was like a really strong point, then you might still not improve as your speech, because maybe what you should have done is actually, spend less time on proving why something is true, and that, that was not tactical. So it's also important to focus on your strengths. It's also good for your, mental health to also hear that, oh, actually, I also did things correctly during the debate and not just things that I did wrong. Then you can also, if you just have trouble, for example, thinking of rebuttal, or you lost a specific clash and there was just good material, you can just ask them, how would I deal with this analysis? Or do you have maybe alternative ways to, forgo this analysis, to just weigh against the impact? And I also think another question is very important, which is how do I get to the next bracket? Because I think sometimes when you ask judges feedback, they're gonna be like, oh, you might need to improve this just slightly, or I think you already had a good speech, and then they say like, maybe you can marginally improve this, which is nice and all. You can become stronger, but sometimes that is different than the actual, you know, like analysis or feedback that will get you to a next bracket. So it's like, oh, you could have done a bit more rebuttal on this point, but you won the case already. But maybe to get to a next bracket, what you need to do is just, I don't know, be more emotive with your impacts, or be a bit more thorough for your analysis. Because again, it is already enough to prove, but maybe to go from that 79 to that 80, for example, or from that 81 to that 83, you need to focus on other things than just winning debate a bit better, but just making it so strong that it's going to be very difficult to go against. Which is why I always ask this specific question beside what should I change? Now, you can also ask questions specific to the debate. And I think that you should do this, if you have more time, for the reason that just because something happened in this debate doesn't mean it will happen in the next debate. And the previous questions are more, how can I improve in the next speech? How can I do better now? Where this is more, oh, this is how you can improve on, this specific analysis, or this is how you can use this information about the economy to outframe this, which is also useful, but it's not necessarily useful for the next debate that you're going to have, because unlikely you're going to have two econ debates with similar analysis, with similar arguments. So the questions you can then ask is, if I had to prove why, so for example, if I had to spend more time explaining why is true, what should I remove from my speech? Because everything, saying like, oh, you need to work more in impacting comes at the opportunity cost of doing more framing, doing more rebuttal. And I think this is also important to ask, because again, sometimes it is just that you're not as time efficient, and being able to know where you spend too much time is going to already help you in that way. So it's also more practical in that, like feedback and analysis, than just, oh, you need to do more impacting. Also, I think this is something you should ask last, because it's important to just work on what you think and you already know and how to improve the skills. But I think when you get more to things such as spec or alternative cases, I think just ask the question, what would you have run here? It's just also a good thing, because sometimes you just have a completely different argument or a completely different thing that they are thinking of during the debate. And just hearing those different perspectives might already just make you a more varied debater, or might be useful for similar motions that you might need to debate. So, as I said, another important thing about feedback is not just improving your speeches, but also finding out where you can find more resources. So if you have a person who knows a lot about econ, or who was able to really track well debate and kind of like point out the flaws maybe in how they frame stuff, or how some material might be weak to some responses, then I think asking that person, do you have any idea where I can find out information about this, is also just a really good question that you can ask during feedback. And also, if you just have a really, really good judge, you can also ask for exercises. So for example, during Psycho Bureaus, Dan and I were judged by a really good judge, and we just had a problem with vertically extending on a really good team. So then we asked, okay, not only what would you have run, but seeing, as you fairly point out in the OA, that it's very hard to extend on this team, do you maybe have a good exercise that we can do? And then we got a detailed explanation of how you can, try to make either a vertical extension or to create extensions in the first place, which, to give that advice immediately, was something along the lines of, give a team like a day to think of as many arguments as they can, and give them like 9-minute speeches, and then try to make new arguments with a 7-minute or even 5-minute speech. So that really forces you to be very creative, and it forces you to really think on your feet as well. And if you do that often enough, then you get that creativity. And also, if the other people have, I don't know, maybe thought about a motion for a day, they might also be able to help you with like, okay, we went through these 5 arguments, but we actually were able to find a 6th argument that we weren't able to bring. But yeah, I would never have found that exercise if I never asked that chair to give me that exercise. Another thing that you can also ask is how they track the debate, and also what workshops you can watch. So of course, there are specific skills that a judge has, and specifically good judges have, which is, how does this interact? What did it specifically say? And if you notice that the judge really excels in that, you can also ask, maybe as a whip, how do you track your opening half when it's really messy? How do you see what analysis is strong and is not strong? And I think that's also something that isn't always asked to chairs, which can actually be very good. I think there's another thing that I want to really stress is also ask your wings for feedback. So also ask not just the chair who might be good, but also your wings who might even be better than the chair at tracking, for example, and therefore might give you more specific advice on how to do better tracking. Or maybe they just have like a completely different view of the debate, where it's like, oh, I thought that it was very nice that everyone talked about this, but I didn't find it intuitive. I didn't understand why nobody talked about why, for example. So just go to your wing feedback. It doesn't need to be as excessive. Again, you cannot have like 15-minute session with each wing and then also the chair and that kind of stuff. But just vibe check, for example. Just be like, what do you think just was our biggest weakness? Or how, do you have any other ideas for cases and that kind of stuff? Because wings oftentimes do have things to add and are oftentimes also good at giving you feedback or giving you new ideas. So now this is also an important thing. So sometimes you feel like a judge might not have been good at tracking you or might not actually value your input as much as you believe it should have been valued. That's sometimes where biases come into play, right? So sometimes it might be that you say specific stuff, but because you're not using the right words, because you have difficulty finding the right words because you're ESL, it might feel like it's a bit unfair against you, or that the person just didn't track you as well because of your accent. Now, how do you then check this bias? So what you can do already during the OA is just listen and do you think that they tracked your speech? Are there just like big humps of analysis that they didn't follow or they just didn't credit? Or are they, for example, inserting themselves? So say we get this weighing, but this weighing is like weak or doesn't, isn't important because of this reason. And that was never in the debate. Or they say like you haven't proven it, but then you feel like you have proven it. They just don't follow the analysis. For example, during feedback, when during the OA to say they didn't respond to X, and then well you did, you can also ask them, do you think that Y would be a good response? And it might be some rebuttal that you had in your speech. Sometimes, because of time reasons, during the OA, they might just leave out that rebuttal because they are like, it's not as important or it wasn't proven sufficiently and that kind of stuff. Or they might have generally not tracked it. So to find that difference, asking this is just a good way to kind of like finding out if this if what happened there. Also, you can just be like, oh, you say I haven't proven why, for example, um, and I try to do that with Z. Do you think that this was not clear? Do you think this was not good enough? And then basically the same happens, right? So again, some chairs like to give OAs which are more big picture, which means that they don't go into detail about what you exactly said and why it might not work, but they're like, you haven't proven this sufficiently, or you just haven't proved this. And when you get to feedback, they might actually be like, oh no, I tracked this, or I didn't find that, or I found it confusing for these and these reasons. Now, this is also important. You might need to also gut check a bit. So you can be like, did I prove this? Which might be hard and might also be hard for your team partner because your team partner know what you were going to say because you had prep time together. So a good check for like, was I indeed too difficult to follow? Was I did not prove this? I should also ask other teams, were you able to track this or do you agree with this? But also you can just ask the wings, right? So maybe the wing actually was able to follow you. Or like, no, you actually were very clear. I don't know why this person was unable to follow you. And I think at the moment you have not only asked the person who is giving the away, but also you've checked with your team partner and you checked with other people. I think that might give you a picture which then shows if this is just like a specific skill issue, for example, or if this is maybe something that is just a bit deeper, where it might be a bias, where it just feels like they're unfairly judging you for a number of reasons. I think that's still important to highlight two things. One, I think it's important to always stay respectful. I know debates can get emotional. I can get emotional too. But, you know, when a person doesn't track you, getting angry at them after the fact won't make them have suddenly tracked you. But also they might just get defensive. They might not give you the good feedback, or they might even, become a bit less fair and that kind of stuff. So I think it's important not only for yourself, but also to them to just continue to be respectful. Again, you can be agitated. Of course, you can be annoyed. That's completely fine. That's completely fair. But it's also about how you behave. And I also want to note that just because someone, for example, had a bad debate where they weren't able to track you, uh, these are still people who are trying their best to judge. So maybe they generally tried the best, but they weren't able to follow your structure, or they weren't able to follow you because the accent makes it you either mispronounce or you swallow in words, which means it's difficult for them to understand what you're talking about. Um, or maybe this is just a one round issue. Maybe they're just really tired. It's round four and this kind of stuff. So again, like this is important to kind of like know and to highlight, but also be nice towards your judges. Why am I still telling you then to do this? Is not only for yourself, because then you can feel a bit justified if you actually have proven something, but just the judge didn't track it. But also, if you put this in feedback and you are putting this and you say, like, we had problems with being tracked and other teams didn't have that problem, or the wing didn't have the problem, and this kind of stuff. And this happens with multiple teams in like multiple rounds, then this is something that the CAs can take into account with either placing stronger panelists with the chair or checking themselves what happens. And that is why I think it's important to do this. So always fill in that feedback. Always do that, because then CAs have the capacity to actually do something about this. If you don't do it and you just stay annoyed, then nothing is going to change. That is why I have this section as well, because this is something that is going to be able to give you good feedback on your chairs and your judges. But also, I think this is important to just improve the quality of judges and just improve the accountability of judges. Now, how do you then get good feedback as a judge? So again, I think you can just ask quick questions, right? So again, maybe they're already giving feedback to other people, and then you just want to have like quick questions before the next round. The question to ask here is just easy. What can I do better? Or what did I already do good? So they could just give you immediately helpful things that you can change. But also there are specific questions that you can ask, right? It is about how were my contributions? What can I add in these contributions to make the deliberation more effective? This can be, do you want me to be a bit more detailed, like, or explain which speaker said the thing that I'm talking about, or do you want me to react more to what that person already states, and that kind of stuff. But also, I think an important thing to add is just sometimes panelists are just like not reacting to what other panelists say, and therefore they just add their own contributions. So I think also it is important to focus on that reaction to what other people have stated, either the chair or the wing, because it is a discussion and it's not kind of like a debate in and of itself. It's like you should react to each other. You should also ask, how can I improve my reactions? And of course, it's also important to consider, was I time efficient? Again, you might be absolutely brilliant and followed every single thing in debate, but if you now give a 5-minute analysis of what OG has proven, it might be really good, but it's not time efficient. So also ask the chair, or if you are a chair and you want to ask your panelists if you think deliberation would time efficiently, then you can ask them, was I time efficient and what can I change to do it? I think also afterwards, this is something that doesn't happen that often, but I think still can be good. It's just vibe check a bit afterwards. This can be a bit more casual conversations, not like, oh, I want feedback on this and this. It's just like, just talk, of course, privately, because speakers shouldn't hear about speaker points. But just with the two of you, hey, do you think speaker points were fair? Do you think we should have spent more time on that? Do you think we were too critical? Do you think we weren't critical enough? All of this. And also afterwards, you could be like, hypothetically, if this team brought X rebuttal or X case, how do you think that would stand in the debate? Because sometimes the debate might be very messy, and you're just wondering how teams could improve. And the moment for example, how a case stands in debate or how a case could stand in debate, you can also pass that feedback on to other teams. So yeah, I think those are things that aren't done often enough as panelists or as chairs, to just vibe check afterwards. So I think this is also important. After the tournament, you can also ask for feedback. I think there are multiple ways to do this. So if you are, for example, being CA checked, you can send them a message afterwards. Because what will happen is when, for example, the CA is chairing the first couple rounds, then they need to give the OA, then they might need to give quick feedback to speakers, and then they immediately need to go to the CA room to do allocations for the next, for the next round. And also verbally give feedback about the wings that they had and all that stuff, which means that they just might not have the time. So you could just always ask them for like, hey, can you just send me a message with feedback? What can I improve? All those stuff. So just ask the same questions as before, but now you can also go into a bit more depth. Also, what you can do is you can get anonymized feedback from the CAs. So during the tournament, people like chairs and wings, but also sometimes teams give feedback on you. You can ask the CA to give you an overview of that feedback. So they're not going to send you the feedback in of itself, because it might be that you might be able to see then who, for example, gave that reaction because oh, this CG in round 3 was really mad at me for these reasons. And now you should all see this in feedback. And therefore, you might create tensions. And, it's also, you submit the feedback with the idea that it is going to be private. So they afterwards just give you anonymized feedback, which is either a rewording / paraphrasing of specific feedback, if it's long enough, or just, oh, as a trend, we saw that your time allocation wasn't good enough. And you just give you a bit of vibes, I guess. So then when, for example, the CA has given you this feedback, you can just ask them, okay, how can I improve this, for example? Because CAs tend to be also good judges, and they also know how to test people. So they also know what they are looking for. So they might be able to just say like, oh, for time management, it might be good, for example, to give each speaker 2 minutes to react or just give a specific time frame. But you can also just ask yourself and ask the CA, okay, if I need to improve this, what can I maybe do? What exercises can I do? Or what resources are there on, for example, panel management or time management on like YouTube or somewhere else? And also an important question to ask is like, this is similar to the question you can ask as a speaker, which is how can I get to the next bracket, which is what would I need to improve to, for example, instead of paneling an out round, to chair an out round or to break deeper. And I want to note, there is always a bit of luck in this, right? So you might be clashed, for example, out of the final because your old former major partner is actually in the final. So you can't help that. Or sometimes you might actually just have good feedback, but then someone else just had even better feedback, which is then again, something that might just be the feedback that you get like, oh, yeah, some people were just, a bit better than you. You already were great. But yeah, so that you also need to accept that sometimes there is a bit of randomness there, and you can't expect to, I don't know, chair every single final or to, break deep in every single tournament because there are just extraneous factors which might determine if a person gets better feedback. There's just a team who gives nicer feedback in general, or there's a team which just got really annoyed at the one round of you. They might always just tank your perception, and they might still break, but you might not break as deep because of that. So now on to the other part, giving good feedback. So I think that if you are a chair, the feedback actually already starts during the OA. And I think what's important for you to become believable as a chair, but also to already give feedback, is to show that you have listened to the debate and go over each argument or if, at least each contributions. Now, sometimes you might go into a bit too much step where like they give this mechanism, they give that mechanism, and this kind of stuff. You don't do enough weighing. What you might want to do then is in broad, they give this case, which might be proven, but we think that this is not as important in debate because the other clash has a larger impact, which is explained in this speech, which is specifically this, this, and this. Since that the other clash wasn't actually impacted enough, we think that this opening half or this debate was basically determined by who wins the clash of, the first clash, which was bigger, which then shows that, again, you have tracked every single stuff. You can maybe say, like, if you want any, you can also say, if you have any questions about that second clash, you can ask a judge in personal feedback. But I think at that point, it kind of like shows that you have tracked it, and then you can focus more deeply on the clash that is the most important. Now, what's also important is you highlight the positives and strengths of each case. So even if a term takes a fourth, you can be like, they have this interesting and significantly new contribution, or they have proved X, which I believe because of these and these reasons, but they don't actually impact it, which means it falls out of the debate. Or you say like, oh, it's really well impacting weight, but because of this reason, and it doesn't react to that, it doesn't actually mechanize or it doesn't actually get to the impact, which is, again, also important because I think you want people to listen to you. And the moment you're also going to be already nice to them and show that you see the strengths in their case, they're much more likely to believe also the negatives that you can then point out, which are like, you haven't proven this, you haven't proven that. And I think also when you are going to go over what they haven't proven, I think this is where you want to put the most detail. So it's like, you haven't proven why you get a better economy because OG says this, this, and this. And we do get some responses, but they are insufficient to take down the core of these claims. That already then makes it more likely for them to know where they need to put the time on, which is again winning the clash on why the economy improves, for example, instead of just impacting why it is important. So Now, after the OA, you want to highlight during the OA that people can come to you for personal feedback and also encourage them to go to your wings and actively encourage them to go to your wings. You can also just, I think the best way to do this is give feedback first to the team who asked first. I think that's just the fairest way to do it. If there are teams who kind of like raise their hands at the same time, or they just ask you at the exact same time, I think at that point, just go to the team who got a lower place because they have the most that they can improve. And of course, you allocate your time then to the other team. Also, sometimes people might be busy or they don't have time and they still want to ask for feedback, but they really can't, or they might be a bit awkward and they don't want to approach you. Then you can just also tell them, hey, during the lunch break, for example, or when you have more time, do you also want feedback? And I think this is also an important step, especially if you are a chair, to just actively give the teams the possibility to ask for feedback by, asking them if they want it, lowering the barrier for them to improve. Now, how do you then give good feedback? And I think this already starts in the way that you target your feedback. So when you consider, for example, a novice or person who's relatively new to debating, clearly you want to already be a bit more kind. So you want to be like, oh, this is actually a really good case, or it's very clear that you have a good way of seeing the debate, or you have very intuitive arguments or intuitive examples. And then you say, but I would maybe, give you, I think you should improve these one or maybe two things, and also actively tell them how they can improve. Because telling a person they should prove more or do more framing is something that's not only that useful if a person doesn't know how to think of framing. So you can say, during prep time, you could ask yourself, how would this look like? And how would this look like in different contexts? And then ask yourself, why is this the case? And can I give maybe a very intuitive example? And it's just not just saying, oh, this is something that is, you need to improve, but also this is how you can improve it. And I think it's also important to not get too technical here. So don't use terms such, oh, you need to think about what the delta in the debate is, and you want to make sure that the comparative is clear and that kind of stuff. Because again, it makes sense if there's a person who already knows what these terms are, but if you can also explain them and it becomes too technical, it basically gets bogged down. And I think you don't need to do it. I think there are oftentimes just way more easier ways to just explain something in everyday language than to use the specific technical terms that we have created for debates. So let's say you have someone who is more experienced than others. It's still important to still be kind. They might be good. They might even be like, I don't know, a world-breaking speaker, but they're still people. So also still be kind to them, of course. And I think it's important that you can get more technical. So you can go a bit more details. You're like, hey, you give this reason for why it's true, but it doesn't actually react to the framing for these reasons. So here's an alternative that you can do, and like stuff. Or you can also be like, okay, you give this reason, but it is weak to this reaction. And I think that at the moment you highlight why it can be weak to a different case. It's also important to highlight, but because it's not in this debate or it wasn't stated in this debate, and it isn't overly intuitive, the average informed newspaper reader would know. It doesn't matter for this debate, but for higher rooms, for example, or for other cases, you might need to react in this way, which is again important because otherwise people get defensive because they feel like you are giving or criticizing their case already with cases that weren't brought into the debate. But what you're actually doing is like, no, it could be better. It could be you could improve in this specific way, but it doesn't matter for this debate, and I don't like change the speaks significantly or whatever. But yeah, I think that's important to also highlight when you get technical and you tell them to improve, to say to what extent it has affected this debate and what the feedback basically means. So this is also important when you target the feedback. You also, of course, think about not only what is their experience level, but also do they understand and agree with the call. Let's say you have someone who clearly doesn't agree with the call, and this can be, of course, you can see during the away, right? You see people like rolling their eyes or just heavily discussing with their partner, and you see them see angry or just in the like personal feedback or like the asking for personal feedback, they're very like, oh, we don't get this or this. What is important is to use what I call the 2-step forward, 1-step back method. So what you oftentimes do here is you highlight the strengths of the team. Just like, okay, yes, I did catch this, for example. However, this is the specific analysis that the other team gives, which you don't react to. And I say, even though it's really good, sadly, debates don't work in a vacuum. Therefore, what you might need to do is just react a bit more. And so what you do is you say, yes, I tracked you. Yes, I was able to follow this, and I think this is good. So you take like 2 steps forward, and then you take a step back, which is like, however, but, and I think that's oftentimes a psychological trick where the person feels like they are listened to because they are, and you also showed strengths, which shows that you don't just see the negatives of them, and therefore they are more accepting of your feedback, and you also can get a more productive discussion. Because sometimes it might just default into a bit more like, oh, but you didn't track it, or oh, we should have done. You feel you're just inserting your case or what you think is a good argument. Again, this in general works. Of course, there might still be teams who still don't agree, and that's fine. You can't always convince everyone, but I think this is just the best way to deal with it. Is the making the best of like a bad situation. Now, now that I've basically told you how you should target your feedback, there's also something important I should highlight what you should do during personal feedback. And I think that this is true for every person, no matter who you target it to. So, firstly, sandwich your feedback. So you always say, oh, I think this was good. And then you say, I think this should be approved. And then you say, but I think this was also good. So that, you warm them up, then you give the critical analysis, and then when they leave, they again still have the compliment. And I think this can be small stuff, right? But it's gonna be like, oh, I really like this example. It shows that you really know what this is about. Or just like small stuff as well. Like, I think you have a very clear way of speaking, and I think you have very good structure. Definitely continue doing it. Which again also then helps them because it's now not just saying, oh, this is what you should not do. It's also this what you should continue doing. Which I think is also a good way to improve speakers or also judges. Now, you also want to be specific. So when you say, oh, you should do more impacting, you can be like, okay, but why does this specific impact not work? And also so like, okay, if you do more impacting, where in the speech should you do it? And what material might you remove? So it's like, oh, you should do more impacting. And be like, yeah, sure, I only spent like half a minute on impacting, but because I did a lot of rebuttal and framing, what should I then deprioritize? So if you already preempt this question and you're like, okay, maybe do a bit less of this because I already believe that you've built the case enough, then you should do more impacting, and then this is what you can bring, for example. I think that's already going to be more useful than just saying this is how you should impact. So lastly, I think where you can also be like is sometimes you have a team that wins or is just good, but they still ask for personal feedback. At which point you might just be like, okay, you win this debate, right? This is enough to prove in the debate, but it was relatively weak. So how can it be bolstered? And I think that again, here you gave feedback such as, oh, during prep time, you might think of 5 mechanisms, but when you bring 5 mechanisms, you don't work each of them out. So think of 3, like kill your darlings, and then work them out into more depth. And then again, to what reactions is this are like these mechanisms possibly weak to? And then you do the thing that I highlighted before, which is you don't just say it is weak to this, and therefore it is bad material, but it's like it's sufficient for this debate, but for high rooms it might not be. So I think for next debates it would be useful to consider this, this, and this, which is again, in a way, the 2-step forward, 1-step back method, because you're saying like I track you, and I think this is sufficient material. I think it's good material, but I think it can be just a bit better. And therefore, it's also something that people just take more into account. So that was basically it. If you have any questions about, any of the material that has been discussed, then you can always put that in the comments. So what's going to be next is there's going to be a video out on structuring your speeches, basically finishing off the basics material of argumentation and the playlist for novice people who want to recapture or recap on just arguments. We're also going to make a video with Rumen Marinov, which is going to be about how to, be a good new DCA, specifically focusing on motions, motion testing, motion creation, all of this stuff. And then there will also be another video, which is basically how to do well in deliberation for chairs and for wings. And basically, we're going to have quite some ground covered. So speakers like CAs, which is a bit more like organizing determinants, as well as judging. So yeah, if you have any other things that you want to see after these workshops, just let us know in the comments or send an email. And then I'll see you in the next video.